My in-laws disinherited my husband years ago because they thought his career was too feminine. Now that they're struggling, they're reaching out to him for help. But he's not ready to forgive. Buckle up because this is a roller coaster. Never ever did I think I'd be riding this, but here we are. My husband, let's call him Stuart, has had a complicated relationship with his parents for years. They disinherited him nearly a decade ago and now they've come back into our lives in the worst possible way. Stuart grew up in a strict household. His parents, whom I refer to as Robert and Susan, were very traditional and had high expectations for their only son. From a young age, it was expected that Stuart would follow in his father's footsteps and do something significant with his life. In fact, Stuart's parents emigrated to the state when they were children and both worked hard in their respective families to build a decent life for themselves. Their expectations for Stuart were that he would achieve something truly great and elevate their economic status. However, Stuart had other plans. He wanted to be an artist, a career his parents did not approve of at all. Worse yet, for such traditional parents, he wanted to pursue a career as a ballet instructor. Stuart's inclination toward ballet developed thanks to his aunt, who was a dance teacher. His parents often worked 2 jobs, so they would leave him at his aunt's dance school as a child. He grew up learning all kinds of dance forms and even performed in several not-so-big shows. His parents were happy as long as it was just a hobby and his prize money bought the family a fancy dinner. But when he expressed his desire to pursue it full-time, they freaked out. The tension between Stuart and his parents grew over the years. They saw his passion for ballet as a waste of time and money. They said they hadn't spent a fortune on his quality education, sending him to private school, just to raise a feminine child. It was derogatory, but they didn't care. They wanted him to become a surgeon, or at least something in the medical field. Despite their disapproval, Stuart followed his dreams. He moved out of his parents' house right after high school and worked various jobs to support himself while attending dance school. The situation came to a head when Stuart was 22 and had just landed his first major job. He was so happy and invited his parents, hoping to share his success with them. Instead of being proud, Robert and Susan were furious. They said he was embarrassing the family by pursuing such a feminine career. They called him names and even cut ties with the aunt who had cared for him. They blamed her for putting this weird idea in his head, accused him of abandoning the family, and wasting his potential. They told him he was no longer welcome in their home and cut off all contact. Since then, he's been on his own, enjoying life, dancing, and teaching. I met him during one of the summer classes organized by my university. He was teaching ballet to students from a different cohort. Once, when our professor was absent, Stuart filled in, and I couldn't stop admiring his flawless movements. I switched cohorts to join his class. It was the first time I approached a man, and it was also the last. The summer class ended, but we continued seeing each other. Before I knew it, 3 years had passed. Stuart was open about his strained relationship with his parents from the start. It broke my heart to see how much their rejection hurt him. But I admired that he had pursued his dreams. He was teaching at 2 dance schools and giving private lessons in his apartment basement on weekends. The building owner allowed him to do so in exchange for free lessons for his 10-year-old daughter. I graduated college, got a job, and we moved in together into a studio apartment. Before, he had been sharing a room with 2 other guys. We got married in a small ceremony with just a few close friends and family. His parents were noticeably absent, but Stuart had come to terms with that. He had built a life for himself without their support, and he was proud of it. He made a decent income, but we lived in the heart of the city, which can make even the wealthiest feel poor. So by the end of the month, we had to rely on bagels and peas. Over the years, we realized our life wasn't improving with this lifestyle. So we decided to move to a quieter town. It was harder because of the lack of job opportunities for Stuart in the suburbs. That's when he decided to open his own dance studio. He'd always dreamed of having his own school, but the costs of infrastructure and setup had discouraged him. Now we had the space. So we converted our garage into a sleek dance school. At first, Stuart complained there wasn't a ballet school in town. But now he was happy there was no competition. I won't say it was an overnight success, because it wasn't. We had to struggle. We didn't have enough money for advertising, so we relied on word of mouth. I talked to my coworkers and neighbors, and slowly it started growing. Gradually, we started living the life we had dreamed of. Owning our home, a nice car, and being able to stock up a month's worth of groceries. It was a dream to have a full fridge. After a year, Stuart bought an abandoned factory and converted it into a large dance school, teaching all dance styles. He hired other teachers because he wasn't an expert in every style. I quit my job and took over the administrative side of the school. Recently, about a month ago, Stuart's parents suddenly showed up at our door. Stuart was shocked and hesitant but let them in. They wanted to reconcile and be part of his life again. They apologized for their mistakes, and there were a lot of tears. They said they were aging and feeling frail and couldn't die with the guilt of disowning their only son. Stuart walked out in tears. It's not easy for him to forget everything and move on. After he left, they took my hands and asked me to help them reconcile with their son. I didn't want to sound rude, so I said I would try. Although I haven't spoken to Stuart about it yet. I don't know if I've watched or read too many stories about greedy parents showing up after their child's success, or if it's just my natural instinct to protect my husband that makes me feel uncomfortable with their re-entry into our lives. I'm not a witch, but that's how I feel. You can help me with some perspective. What do you think? Did they come back purely out of love, or do they have hidden motives? Update 1. Thanks for your comments. As most of you said, it was hard to guess their true intentions, so I let Stuart decide without sharing my opinion. Initially, he was hesitant, but his optimism, as always, took over and he decided to give them a chance. I don't blame him. That optimism is what brought him to where he is today. Meanwhile, Susan had been inviting us to dinner, so when Stuart made his decision, we accepted her invitation. It was awkward but civil. Stuart was holding back, trying not to make the situation uncomfortable for me. They visited us occasionally, and although the conversations were tense, Stuart appreciated the effort they were making. A couple of meetings passed like this, and I noticed that Stuart's repressed anger toward his parents was being bottled up when it should have been let out. Their relationship seemed to improve on a superficial level, but Stuart still had mixed feelings about them. I suggested therapy, but knowing Stuart, I wasn't surprised by his response. He denied having any issues worth discussing with a therapist, so the next best option was confrontation. The next time Susan invited us over, I backed out of the plan and asked Stuart to go alone. He refused, saying it would be uncomfortable. I told him that was the problem. It shouldn't be uncomfortable to meet your parents. Get rid of your bitterness and confront them once and for all. He went and they had an open but civil discussion. Things improved after that. However, it didn't take long for their true intentions to be revealed. One evening, after a few glasses of wine, Susan let slip about their financial troubles. Their business had gone bankrupt and they were facing foreclosure on their house. We were stunned to hear that. We didn't expect it, at least not so soon. I was definitely cautious about their intentions, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, they never showed up during our tough times, but when the sun shone on us, they suddenly appeared in our lives. That can't be a coincidence, right? Stuart and I exchanged glances, wondering what to say. Sometimes I wish we had those telepathic conversations you see in TV shows. It would be so helpful in moments like these. He was direct and asked if they wanted money from him. Susan, looking embarrassed, said, "Honey, I know what you're thinking, but trust me, that's not it. Our intention isn't money. We love you and want you back in our lives." Stuart, acting naive, said, "Thank goodness you're not asking for money because that would have meant you reconciled only for dollars." Susan went pale and forced a smile. A week later, Robert called Stuart for a private meeting. Robert laid everything out. Contrary to what Susan had said, he revealed that their business was barely surviving. They had put it up for sale, along with all resources, tools, the website, and infrastructure. Their house was supposedly about to be foreclosed, so they wanted Stuart to help them. The reasoning? Because we don't have kids. And for some reason, they thought they'd outlive us. Stuart was devastated. He had hoped they genuinely wanted to reconcile, but it was clear they were only interested in what he could give them. More specifically, they wanted our summer home and a monthly allowance of $5,000. Stuart was furious and asked why they had hidden their motives when they could have just asked for money in the first meeting. Susan yelled, "Would you have agreed to give us that the first time we saw you?" "No, right?" Stuart replied. "So it's all about money, isn't it?" Susan tried to calm him and said they truly loved him and the money was only a part of it. Stuart shouted, "Then why didn't you come to see me when I was at my lowest struggling for a meal?" Robert intervened, yelling back, "Because we wanted you to suffer for your mistakes. You chose that pathetic career and abandoned the idea of studying a significant field. We wanted you to rot until you came back to us begging for forgiveness." Stuart responded, "Wow. And now you want a share of the property I built with that same pathetic, effeminate career." Robert snarled, "Whatever. And don't you dare raise your voice to us. We raised you, sacrificing our own needs. You owe us this. We're not beggars. We're asking for what is rightfully ours." Stuart stormed out of the house, unable to take it anymore. Susan tried to stop him, but he left. Susan followed him home and apologized for Robert's outburst. She excused it, blaming Robert's hypertension, and expressed regret over how things had turned out. However, she admitted they were truly in trouble, about to become homeless, and needed our help. I have no idea what Stuart is thinking about all this now. Update 2. After the confrontation, Robert and Susan returned again a week later. Stuart told them he didn't feel comfortable giving them our retirement home, especially after years without contact. He offered to invest in their business so they could support themselves, but that wasn't enough for them. They demanded a share of our property, claiming that, as his parents, they had a right to it. They also argued that since we don't have children, we didn't need so much money and should take care of them instead. Yes, we don't have children, but that doesn't mean we didn't want to have one. In our younger years, our finances were so tight that we couldn't even think about bringing a child into our lives. Now that things have improved, we've crossed the age for having a biological child, but we're considering adoption anyway. Their accusations infuriated us. Stuart doesn't want to leave them homeless, but before helping them, he thoroughly investigated their financial affairs. To our surprise, Stuart discovered that Robert had deliberately put his house up for sale. The mortgage had been paid off long ago, so they lied about the foreclosure. The truth was that they wanted our retirement home and planned to live off our income while enjoying a good life by selling their house and business. Stuart called Robert and confronted him with the truth. Robert spun another lie, claiming he was deeply in debt and had to sell his house and business to settle it. We all knew it was a lie because Stuart found out they were planning a trip with the money. They denied it, saying it was none of our business to investigate their lives. It was their money, and they could do whatever they wanted while it was his duty as their son to take care of them. That was the last straw for Stuart. He made it clear that we wouldn't give them a single cent and that we were cutting them out of our lives. Robert and Susan didn't take it well. They threatened legal action claiming they had a right to his assets. We're not worried. It's an empty threat. In this country, when someone threatens someone else, it always seems to involve a lawsuit, even when they have no case. In any case, Stuart was furious and deeply hurt. He had let them back into his life only to be betrayed again. We knew we had to protect ourselves, so we consulted a lawyer. Fortunately, our lawyer assured us that Stuart's parents had no legal right to his properties or assets. However, we still had to be cautious. Stuart drafted a strict will. We are in the process of adopting a child, and we need to ensure their social and financial security. I feel sorry for Stuart for having to deal with such narcissistic parents. They brought it on themselves. I mean, we could have taken care of them if they hadn't acted so arrogantly. Every child wants to fulfill their parents' dreams, but not if the parents try to achieve them through threats and lies. They didn't need to create this facade of debt to extort us. They could have been loving and caring parents. Unfortunately, they never were. They always saw Stuart as a lifeless resource. And you reap what you sow. Update 3. Things took a dramatic turn after Stuart cut them off a few months ago. Robert and Susan began relentlessly harassing us. They started showing up at our dance school unannounced, disrupting classes, and even speaking poorly about Stuart. They went so far as to contact Stuart's students in an attempt to tarnish his reputation. They spread rumors that Stuart and I physically abused young preteen girls at our dance school. The truth is, the last few months have been a nightmare. We had to involve our lawyer again. The stress was taking a toll on both of us. Stuart was losing sleep, and I was constantly on edge. We knew we had to take steps to put an end to this harassment. That's when we decided to involve the police. Although our students and their parents know us personally and hadn't taken any action against us, it was only a matter of time before someone could be manipulated into reporting us based on their rumors. So we filed a formal defamation complaint against them. We didn't want the police to arrest them, but they needed to be put in their place. They were served with a notice to stay away from us if they didn't want to spend the rest of their days in jail. The next time Robert and Susan showed up at our dance school, we called the police. We explained the situation and showed them the threatening messages we had received. The officers were understanding and gentle with them due to their old age. Nonetheless, my in-laws got into a fight with the police. My in-laws told them to stay out of family matters. One of the officers was literally laughing when Susan asked them to tell us to meet their demands. Robert claimed he had spent a lot of money raising Stuart and was now entitled to reap the fruits of his investment. The police tried to handle the situation calmly, but when my in-laws wouldn't back down, they sternly warned them to stay away from us and eventually escorted them off the property. The police also advised us to get a restraining order, which we immediately did. This seemed to deter them for a while, but soon they found other ways to harass us. Despite the restraining order and police intervention, Robert and Susan didn't back off. They stood outside our house and dance school with flyers and posters calling us frauds. They felt entitled to our property simply because they had given birth to and raised Stuart. When we called the police again, Robert argued that the flyers didn't have anyone's name on them, giving the officers a hard time. I overheard one of the officers saying they should take their issues to court if they had so many problems with us. I don't blame him. He said this to mitigate the chaos they were creating on the street. But their stubbornness led them to file a lawsuit claiming they had a right to a share of Stuart's earnings and properties. Our lawyer assured us the lawsuit was baseless, but we still had to go through the process of defending ourselves in court. The legal battle was exhausting and expensive. We had to gather evidence, attend court hearings, and deal with all the stress caused by this nonsense they invented. They demanded support, claiming Stuart was their only child and that they had invested in him, so they deserved a return. Stuart was emotionally drained, and it was affecting his creativity. It was hard for him to focus on his dance classes, and we had to hire some instructors to replace him temporarily. It broke my heart to see him so tired and sad every night. However, we knew we had to push through. We couldn't let them win. We had worked too hard to build our life together, and we weren't going to let anyone take it away from us. After months of back and forth, we finally had our day in court. Our lawyer presented a solid case highlighting the years of estrangement and the lack of any legal basis for Robert and Susan's claims. They constantly played the cards of old age and being poor parents. At one point, Stuart even agreed to pay a one-time sum as compensation for raising him. But they clung to their demands for a house and a monthly allowance. The amount wasn't significant, but Stuart wanted to put an end to this. After much negotiation, Robert agreed to the one-time payment but demanded $1 million. I almost fainted when I heard that number. Before Stuart could react, the judge not only dismissed the lawsuit but also the entire case. The judge saw through their manipulations and ruled in our favor. It was a huge relief, but we still had to deal with the emotional toll. Robert and Susan were furious. They stormed out of the courtroom in anger, but not before making one last threat. They swore they would find another way to make Stuart pay. The good news is that their lawyer was sanctioned. According to our lawyer, it's not uncommon for some attorneys to take on cases like this because, despite the sanctions, since they usually require upfront payment, they end up making money regardless of whether they win anything for their clients. I guess there are bad professionals in every field, just like we've seen bad teachers at our dance school. The kind who don't correct students' movements, arrive late, or end classes earlier than scheduled. Those are the teachers we always let go as they're not good for business in the long run. Regarding Stuart's parents, we also took further measures to protect ourselves. We installed security cameras around our house and dance school to prepare for whatever Robert and Susan might try next. The police advised us to hire security for our summer house or maybe rent it out to protect it from my in-laws' intrusion. We definitely didn't want another court case or another encounter with them or the police. We didn't need this kind of trouble in our lives. It's been over 2 weeks since all the drama ended. I hope they give up after this. A few days ago, I found out they wanted to buy back their house from the new owner at the same price they sold it for. But the new owner increased the price by 30%. Now they're busy dealing with him. I feel bad for that poor guy, but it's good for us that they're occupied with someone else. We've also started a defamation lawsuit against his parents. Since we're still within the 12-month period since they defamed us and our business, I'll let you know how that turns out. Update 4. Well, I don't know where to start, as there's a lot to unpack in this update. Maybe not as much as in the last one, but still, there are some important developments. To start, we've won the defamation lawsuit. It wasn't pleasant to return to court and see their faces again. But at least we won. We didn't gain much though, since the lies they spread about our business didn't cause significant damage. It could have been worse, but it wasn't, so the judge only awarded us about $3,500 in compensation, which is almost the attorney's entire commission. Many in the previous comments recommended suing, claiming it was the best course of action. But in my experience, it's not always advisable, as lawsuits aren't free and don't always compensate when you add the emotional toll and the time we lost dealing with this. The truth is we lost more in this case than we gained. It's not just the stress, but also the hours we could have spent working on our business instead of dealing with this. So for those facing similar issues, think carefully before suing. I've often seen that advice in other Reddit posts, and I don't think it's always the best option. The only positive thing we might get from this is that it may discourage my in-laws from returning to their old ways, but only time will tell. At least for now, they haven't, but you never know if they'll try again in weeks, months, or years. But that's not all with them, as there's still the part where they tried to break into the summer house, which happened shortly after they lost the defamation lawsuit. Luckily, The advice to install cameras was good, so we quickly knew someone was there. We got a call from a neighbor who said someone had entered the house. At first, he thought it was us, but he didn't see our car, nor had we stopped by his house to greet him, which he found odd. We always greet him when we go to that house. So we checked the cameras, and it was them. We called the police, and Stuart went over to file a report and show the camera evidence. I think we'll refrain from filing a lawsuit to make them pay for the broken window they used to get in, as it's easier to just buy a new one. Even so, they could face charges, although trespassing only carries up to 6 months in prison and a $750 fine. If something happens with that, I'll come back to update. If there's no update, it's because they didn't receive any punishment. Our neighbors didn't call the police because they weren't sure if the intruders were trespassers or people we had invited. Update 5. This is a brief update to share what happened. They didn't receive prison time as they are elderly, and the judge took pity on them. I don't think they're too old for such a punishment, but they must have caught the judge in a good mood that day. They were only ordered to pay $290 as a fine, which covers what we spent on repairing the window. A not-so-fancy dinner. I wish I had better news to share, as I was expecting some too, but that's all there is. At least they've been quiet lately.